So I was looking, and the thing I noticed, right, was that it kind of combines, and you were telling me, the meditative element, like the mindfulness thing, with resistance training or flow movements, right? Movements that mimic resistance training in a natural way, I guess. Right?
Yeah, that's kind of an okay way to put it. The whole system really revolves around mindfulness and awareness. So whether we're doing body weight or swinging clubs, maces, kettlebells, it doesn't matter, right? It's all about staying focused on what you're doing and linking that with the way you're breathing. It's also one of the ways that we anchor in kind of the now.
Okay, and you really do, the breathing is, I'd imagine, important. So with everything you're doing here, it's full awareness, right?
Yes, it's very, so not only are we focused on our breathing, and really I would say the breathing is the core element of the whole thing. It's kind of breathing with movement, as opposed to thinking about a lot of training where people think about the movements or the exercise and then the breath is kind of an afterthought, right? There's not much focus given to that. And then, with the implements that we work with, kettlebells are an example, but especially maces and clubs and that sort of thing require a high level of awareness when you just use them. Because they're swung at speed, we're in a small space, we've got other people in the space, and so it requires a certain level of mindfulness. They're kind of the antithesis of standing on the treadmill.
Mindfulness don't hit each other,
standing on the treadmill like watching TV, right? It's like the total opposite end of like you've got to be paying attention to what you're doing.
But it's cool. The implements are completely different. So you showed me you have the clubs, you have the maces, and those kind of they mimic resistance training. They really allow you to employ resistance in the flow state, right?
So basically, the value of the clubs and maces is they're lighter in actual weight, but because the weight is displaced away from the hands and they're swung at higher speeds, they create a much larger resistance on the body than just the weight of the implement itself, right? So a mace might weigh 15 pounds, but at the bottom of a backswing in a traditional swing, the mace probably weighs 4 to 5 times that. So the force it's putting on the body is 60 to 75 pounds. Does that make sense?
No, so it encourages you to use your core, to use your whole body to maintain that resistance. Even though it's light, it's not when it's away from you.
When you're swinging it at speed with the displaced weight, it's a lot more weight than just the 15 pounds that the mace weighs or the 2 pounds that the club weighs.
That's going to suck after a while. Yeah, that's going to feel like something.
They're definitely full body. So a misconception people have about clubs and maces is that they're arm exercises and they have large benefits for the arms and they're obviously held in the hands, but they're very much like a full body type of exercise. You're swinging, I often tell people, you're swinging the club or the mace with your whole body, right? It's helpful to even visualize that. And they're very focused on connective tissue and fascial strength, as opposed to what a lot of strength training is focused on is muscular strength. So,
and it brings up an interesting question. Generally with traditional forms of strength training, you're always going to run into the problem with the fascia. You're always going to run into the problem where you are very stiff because of all that repetition. And so this strikes me as a way to manipulate the fascia while you're doing that strength training. So you're not allowing yourself to be stiff. You're allowing yourself to be mobile.
You have to be very mobile and relaxed. And in fact, folks that do a lot of linear, like heavy strength training with barbells and things like that tend to look tend to look a little bit silly at first. And the other thing that we're employing that I think is drastically missing in a lot of conventional training programs is rotation. So moving through the transverse plane. And so a lot of what we do here is beneficial for people in sports. It's beneficial for people who just want to get in shape, but it's also beneficial as a supplement to people who lift and do those things.
How did you personally get into this before you opened up the building? Were you was your practice in this? Like, this is kind of how you conducted your life as far as workouts go? You sort of employed these methods?
So it's been about 15 years. I got into fitness to get in shape myself, and went through a lot of stages of conventional training, did the CrossFit type stuff, barbell lifting, all of it.
Usual.
And then just kind of, I guess I'm an inquisitive person, and I just kept searching and got into kettlebells back when they weren't quite as widespread as they are now, but they were kind of starting to get bigger, and that was kind of my gateway into thinking about things a little bit different and finding maces and clubs and all of that sort of thing, and then realizing how central breath work is. And by breath work, I don't mean the conventional, like laying on the ground, meditative type breath work. We do that, but we're also employing different types of breath work at high intensity. So
that's interesting, and it's funny because the traditional teaching for breath work, right, whenever it comes to lifting weights, is always the exhale when you're pushing, right, and then the inhale when you kind of load up for the movement, you know. And I'm learning too that it's that, and you can tell me too, just when you guys do it, I imagine it's not really breathing at the proper time. It's breathing regularly, right? It's maintaining, like, understanding that you just need to keep breathing, as opposed to like, okay, exhale, or I don't know. You tell me.
So it's fairly, I guess if we want to try to really dig into it, it gets a little bit complex, but it's essentially, with the movement, it's the same. It's awareness.
Okay.
So, we kind of say it's only wrong if you're not aware of what you're actually doing. So, for instance, if you're holding the breath unconsciously, that's not a great thing, right?
Yeah.
But we actually train conscious breath holds in here, and if you're doing something consciously with awareness, it can have major benefits. And paradoxically, practicing conscious breath holds can help you to mitigate or get rid of unconscious breath holding throughout the day or during training.
That's really cool, actually. I've never heard that before. But it makes sense, though. It all goes back to awareness. So it's a paradox, but it's still mindfulness, even though you're doing what most people would consider not good if you were lifting weights or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So we don't look at it in the conventional sense of this movement was done wrong. So for instance, someone might say, don't let your knees cave in, right? And maybe if you're under a heavy load, that's sound advice. But in here, if you're aware that you're doing that and you're consciously doing something like that, there's benefit to that. And that's kind of how we look at it, as opposed to this is right or this is wrong in the conventional sense.
Just fitness in general is not tackled from the mindfulness side anymore. So with meditation, and I learned this recently, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but meditation is not anything. It doesn't have anything to do with letting your mind go blank. Meditation has more to do with being very aware of what's around you and what's actually going through your head.
It's about presence and mindfulness. So it's not about, your mind can't go blank.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's not what you're trying to do. Your mind is going to wander, and the drill, the practice, the training is bringing it back to the point of focus. And every time you do that, those are kind of like repetitions, essentially, is a way to think about it. So every time
it is practice still. It's really still mental practice. And
it's mental practice, and a lot of people think you're supposed to go still, and they quit because they have to keep recentering the mind. But it's actually the recentering the mind that's the entire point. Does that make sense?
That does, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's unusual because it makes more sense that way, but just, you always hear the traditional definition maybe getting skewed by thinking that meditation is like just, you're just like spacious, you're looking at yourself from another dimension or something.
And and the power of doing that under the stress of physical training transfers better to real life and being able to center yourself under duress at work, for instance, than laying still and trying to center. So there's value in what we think of as meditation is laying and kind of recentering in that way. It's hard to cross that over, though, because when you're at work, for instance, and you're stressed, or something out in real life stresses you out, you're not laying down still on the ground, right? You have to do things. And so through training, using physical implements and physical training to create a stress response and then using the breath to center and regulate that stress response transfers much better to like real life, I guess.
See, I like that because that's what we have to be caught up in, is the transferability aspect.
Yes.
So trying to do shit here that makes sense when you go out there.
Right.
So that's awesome. Oh my gosh. And then I was looking around too. Can you explain to me? So everything is used in a similar way as like the hammer, I'm guessing. But what are those right there? Those two things.
So we have two different types of clubs here. So maces and clubs are in the same family. Maces are essentially just big clubs.
Okay.
And then we have meal, which are the bigger clubs you see hanging here. Those are from Iran. They're typically swung one in each hand. They can get quite heavy.
Sure.
And then we have what's known as Indian clubs, which are lighter clubs. They're called Indian clubs because the British took them from India, and kind of in Europe they kind of developed there's a number of different styles of club swinging and all of that sort of thing.
So that originates from there. That's really kind of where the movement comes from.
Yeah, right? Clubs and maces originate from like South Asia, Middle East. Yeah.
See, I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. So you're implementing those things into this process.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And then you guys could do the traditional stuff, I guess, when you get the bar up here and you got the rings. So.
Yeah. So we do a kind of a mixture. The exercises to people who came in some would look familiar and some would look very different.
So you tailor it. Like when they come in, you do personalize it a little bit to how people are going through it.
It's personalized, and some of our philosophies and how we do things are kind of out there. They don't necessarily connect with people and the traditional fitness paradigm. And so having things, I think, that are familiar to people and talking in ways that are familiar to people is helpful, because sometimes it can be a little out there, I guess, if you try to
But I get fed up with the traditional fitness paradigm. That's that's why I'm here. It's like the process of implementing some form of recovery or mindfulness into traditional stuff, is frowned upon, or maybe I don't know. Do you feel like people? You said people don't take to this as well as they do with like traditional stuff.
I think the general population. We have not a huge base of clientele, but our base of our community is very very strong.
Yeah,
like the people that are into it are into it.
Yeah,
right?
This is the kind of thing that like generates retention. Like once they see it and they feel it, it's probably the only thing they do after a while.
Yep, that is the case with a lot of our folks.
Oh my gosh, man! And then so tell me, you have that room over there, and that's for the meditative sessions, right?
The back room is kind of a tumbling room. Okay. It's a little bit. It's just a smaller space. Sometimes we'll work a couple trainers at a time in here, so somebody can work back there, somebody can work up front. Classes, we do different circuits with natural movement that run through the whole space, almost like a course, I guess you would describe it as.